240 hours, October 23, 1942. Kilometer 105 coastal road west of El Alamein. General Feldmarshal Erwin Rommel stands beside his Horch staff car watching the horizon. The British barrage has been going for 20 minutes, 882 guns firing simultaneously. The sound is continuous, overlapping not individual explosions, but a single sustained roar. The western sky flickers orange. He counts the seconds between flashes and estimates the fall of shot. The barrage is falling on the forward positions of the 164th Light Division and the Italian Trento Division, 5,000 meters east of his current position. Rommel returned to North Africa 6 hours ago. He was in Austria on medical leave recovering from jaundiced desert sores and exhaustion. The telephone call from Oberkommando der Wehrmacht came at 1300 hours. General Stumm, his temporary replacement, had died of a heart attack. British offensive imminent. Return immediately. Rommel flew from Wiener Neustadt to Rome to Crete to Tobruk. His Junkers, Churchill Ju-52, landed at dusk. He drove straight to headquarters. The staff officers briefed him on the situation. The briefing took 12 minutes. The situation is catastrophic. The Panzer Army Africa holds a defensive line 40 miles long from the Mediterranean coast south into the Qattara Depression. Rommel commands 104,000 men, 53,000 German, 51,500 Italian. He has 489 tanks, 278 German, 211 Italian. Of the German tanks, only 211 are operational. 38 are Panzer IV Ausf F2s with the long-barreled 75mm Quetzalcoatl 40 gun, the only German tank that can penetrate British armor at range. The remaining operational German tanks are Panzer III Ausf Js with 50mm guns and Panzer II light tanks with 20mm automatic cannons. The Italian tanks are M1340s with 47mm guns, obsolete, under-armored, mechanically unreliable. Facing him, Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army, 195,000 men. One Natsuno 29 tanks, including 252 American-built M4 Shermans with 75mm guns and 170 M3 Grants with hull-mounted 75mm guns and turret-mounted 37mm guns. 316 of Montgomery's tanks are Crusaders and Valentines lighter British designs with 40mm and 57mm guns. Montgomery has 908 field guns and 1,451 anti-tank guns, including 94 American 105mm pieces and 85 towed 6-pounder anti-tank guns. He has 530 operational aircraft. The RAF Western Desert Air Force outnumbers the Luftwaffe's Fliegerkorps Africa and Italian Regia Aeronautica combined by a factor of 4 to 1. The barrage continues. Rommel calculates tonnage from the sustained rate of fire. Montgomery is expending approximately 500 tons of high explosive per hour on the forward positions. This will continue for hours. This is not a raid. This is the offensive. The mathematics are unforgiving. Rommel has fought in North Africa since February 1941. He arrived in Tripoli with orders to conduct a limited defensive operation to prevent Italian collapse in Libya after the British destroyed 10 Italian divisions in Operation Compass. He was given command of 2 German divisions, the 5th Light Division and the 15th Panzer Division. Approximately 25,000 men. He was ordered to hold Tripolitania. Instead, he attacked. On March 24, 1941, Rommel captured El Agheila. On April 3, he captured Benghazi. On April 11, he reached Tobruk and laid siege. By April 14, he had advanced 600 miles in 3 weeks, with a force 1/10 the size of the British Army opposing him. German newsreels called him the Desert Fox. British commanders called him reckless. His own superiors called him insubordinate. He ignored them all. He understood something about desert warfare that conventional doctrine did not account for in terrain without natural cover. Mobility was defense. A force that moved faster than the enemy could observe and respond, could strike from unexpected directions, bypass strong points, and collapse defensive lines by threatening lines of communication rather than reducing fortified positions. He also understood logistics. Desert warfare was not won by superior numbers or firepower, but by fuel, water, and supply lines stretching back to ports. The British supplied 8th Army through Alexandria, 600 miles behind the front. Rommel supplied Panzer Army Africa through Tripoli, 200 miles behind the front, and Benghazi 400 miles behind the front when he controlled it. Every mile Rommel advanced, lengthened his supply lines, and shortened British supply lines. Every mile the British retreated, shortened their supply lines, and lengthened Rommel's. The elastic front stretched and compressed across 400 miles of coastal desert between El Agheila in the west and El Alamein in the east. Rommel advanced when he had fuel. He retreated when fuel ran out. Then he advanced again when supplies arrived. In summer 1942, Rommel came closest to winning. On June 21st, he captured Tobruk after an 8-month siege. 25,000 British and South African troops surrendered. Rommel seized 2,000 tons of fuel, 5,000 tons of rations, and 2,000 vehicles. Hitler promoted him to Generalfeldmarschall, the youngest field marshal in the Wehrmacht, at age 50. On June 23rd, Rommel crossed into Egypt. On June 30th, he reached El Alamein, 60 miles from Alexandria, 120 miles from Cairo. 8th Army was shattered. British headquarters in Cairo burned classified documents. Rear echelon units prepared for evacuation. The Suez Canal, Britain's strategic lifeline to India and the Far East, was within reach. Then Rommel's fuel ran out. The First Battle of El Alamein. July 1st to 27, 1942 was a month of failed attacks and desperate improvisations as both sides traded inconclusive blows while regrouping. Rommel launched limited offensives with whatever fuel arrived. Montgomery, newly appointed to command 8th Army on August 13th, refused to counterattack until his force was ready. He stockpiled supplies. He trained units. He studied Rommel's tactics. He waited. By October 1942, Montgomery was ready. Rommel was not. Panzer Army Africa had fuel for 9 days of operations at normal consumption rates, 3 days at combat rates. Rommel requested 30,000 tons of fuel per month. He received 8,000 tons in September. He received 7,000 tons in October. Italian merchant ships carrying fuel and ammunition from Italy to North Africa were sunk by British submarines and aircraft operating from Malta. In October, 60% of Axis shipping to North Africa was sunk before reaching port. The supplies that did arrive came through Tripoli and Benghazi. Trucks hauling fuel from Tripoli consumed half their cargo driving to the front. Trucks from Benghazi, closer but under constant air attack, consumed 1/4 of their cargo. Rommel calculated consumption rates and supply rates and recognized the conclusion: Panzer Army Africa could not sustain offensive operations, could not retreat rapidly if defeated, could barely maneuver to meet an attack. He requested permission to withdraw to a shorter defensive line farther west. Berlin refused. Hitler's directive, issued October 3rd, was explicit. The El Alamein position must be held at all costs. It is not possible to withdraw even 1 kilometer. Victory or death. Rommel recognized the political necessities behind the order. German forces were advancing into the Caucasus. If Stalingrad fell and the Soviet oil fields at Baku were captured, Germany could supply Panzer Army Africa indefinitely. If 8th Army was destroyed, Rommel could advance to Alexandria and the Suez. The confluence of these two strategic victories would cut Soviet and British supply lines, simultaneously collapse the Mediterranean theater, and potentially force Britain to negotiate. But these were strategic possibilities contingent on operational successes that required fuel Rommel did not have. The logic was circular. The mathematics were unforgiving. At 2200 hours on October 23rd, the British barrage lifts. Rommel hears the change in sound, the sustained roar fragments into individual explosions, falling deeper into the defensive zone. The British infantry are advancing. He drives forward to the headquarters of the 164th Light Division. The situation reports arrive in fragments over the next 3 hours. British infantry 4 divisions on a 6-mile front have penetrated the forward minefields. German and Italian strongpoints are holding in most sectors but isolated in others. Tank formations are moving up behind the infantry. The weight of the attack is concentrated in the north on the coastal sector, precisely where Rommel expected. Montgomery's plan, captured from documents on a dead officer days earlier, is methodical. A massive infantry assault will clear lanes through the Axis minefields. Armored divisions will exploit the breakthrough. The weight of numbers will overwhelm the defense. It is not an imaginative plan. It does not need to be. Montgomery has 129 tanks. Rommel has 489. Montgomery has fuel. Rommel does not. By dawn on October 24th, the situation clarifies. British infantry have penetrated up to 5,000 meters into the Axis defensive zone in the northern sector. German 80mm anti-tank guns and dug-in panzers have stopped the British armor at the second minefield line. Casualties are heavy on both sides. The British lose 200 tanks on the first day, but they have 829 remaining. Rommel loses 49 German tanks and 28 Italian tanks. He has 412 remaining. Montgomery can sustain this attrition. Rommel cannot. October 25th. British attacks continue. Infantry push forward in short advances. Tanks probe for weak points. The Luftwaffe flies 40 sorties. The RAF flies 1,000 sorties. German supply columns moving forward are strafed and bombed. Fuel trucks burn. Ammunition trucks explode. By nightfall, Rommel has 322 operational tanks. Montgomery has 800. October 26th. The 15th. Panzer Division counterattacks at 600 hours to restore the defensive line. They advance 2,000 meters, destroy 32 British tanks, then withdraw under artillery fire. The counterattack consumes fuel Rommel cannot replace. By evening, 57 more German tanks are destroyed or immobilized by mechanical failure. Rommel has 265 operational tanks. Montgomery has 770. Rommel sends a situation report to Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. The British offensive has superior numbers, superior supplies, and air supremacy. Panzer Army Africa is fighting without adequate fuel or ammunition. Casualties are mounting. Tank strength is declining. The defensive line cannot hold indefinitely. He requests permission to prepare a fallback position. Berlin's response arrives October 27th. Hold the El Alamein line. No withdrawal authorized. October 28th. Montgomery shifts his attack south, probing the Italian sectors held by the Brescia and Pavia divisions. The Italian infantry fight with determination but lack anti-tank weapons effective against Shermans. British armor breaks through at 1400 hours. Rommel commits his reserve, the 21st Panzer Division, and remnants of the Ariete Division to counterattack and seal the breach. The counterattack succeeds. The British withdraw. Rommel has stabilized the line. He has also expended his last mobile reserve. That night, Rommel calculates remaining strength. He has 187 operational German tanks, 90 Italian tanks, fuel for 3 days of combat operations, ammunition stocks at 40% of required levels. British tank strength estimated from reconnaissance and captured prisoners, 650 operational tanks with reserves arriving daily. The mathematics are unforgiving. Montgomery pauses his offensive October 29-31. He is not retreating, he is regrouping. British units withdraw from forward positions, consolidate resupply, and prepare for a renewed attack. Rommel uses the pause to reorganize his forces. He cannot replace losses. He can only redistribute surviving units. The 15th Panzer Division and 21st Panzer Division are consolidated under a single headquarters. Italian infantry divisions are assigned to defensive sectors where mobility is less critical. The 90th Light Division German infantry trained for mobile operations is shifted north to reinforce the critical coastal sector. Rommel meets with his staff officers at 2200 hours on October 30th. He presents the situation without embellishment. Panzer Army Africa has lost 52% of its tank strength. Infantry casualties exceed 30% in some units. Fuel stocks are critical. Ammunition stocks are adequate for 3 days of intensive combat. British forces retain overwhelming superiority in number, supplies, and air support. The defensive line will not survive another major offensive. His intelligence officer, Major F.W. von Mellenthin, asks the inevitable question, what are our options? Rommel answers 3. First, continue defending the current line until the enemy breaks through, at which point the entire army is destroyed or captured. Second, withdraw immediately to a prepared fallback position, preserving mobility and combat strength. Third, fight a delaying action, conduct a phased withdrawal while inflicting maximum casualties on the pursuing enemy trading space for time, preserving the core of the army while evacuating supplies and wounded. His chief of staff, General Alfred Gauss, reminds him of Hitler's directive, victory or death, no withdrawal authorized. Rommel's response is matter-of-fact. Then, we prepare for option 3 and implement it when the British attack resumes. Berlin will authorize withdrawal after the line collapses. By then, it may be too late to conduct an organized retreat. We prepare now. The staff officers do not argue. They have fought under Rommel for 18 months. They recognize his logic. Orders are issued that night, classified as contingency planning for local withdrawals. Units are assigned withdrawal routes. Supply dumps are prioritized for evacuation. Rearguard positions are identified. The planning is detailed and comprehensive. It is also unauthorized. November 1st. Montgomery's renewed offensive begins at 100 hours, Operation Supercharge. The attack concentrates on a 4-mile front in the northern sector, targeting the junction between the 15th Panzer Division and the Littorio Division. The barrage lasts 4 hours, 360 guns firing simultaneously. At 10 hours, British infantry advance. At 15 hours, British armor follows. By 800 hours, the Littorio Division has collapsed. Italian infantry retreat in disorder. British tanks exploit the gap. The 15th Panzer Division counterattacks from the north. The 21st Panzer Division counterattacks from the south. German 88 mm anti-tank guns positioned in Overwatch destroy 40 British tanks in 30 minutes. But the British continue advancing. Fresh battalions replace casualties. New tank regiments move forward. The German counterattacks slow the British advance but cannot stop it. At 1200 hours, Rommel commits his last operational reserves, the remnants of the Ariete Armored Division and the 90th Light Division, to contain the breakthrough. The counterattack is coordinated with Luftwaffe Stuka dive bombers, the first concentrated air support Rommel has received in days. The attack stalls the British advance temporarily. By 1600 hours, British armor resumes movement. The defensive line is fragmenting. Rommel orders a fighting withdrawal to secondary positions 5 kilometers west. The order violates Berlin's directive, but the alternative is encirclement and annihilation. Units withdraw after dark, covered by rearguards. By dawn, November 2nd, Panzerarmee Rear. Africa occupies a new defensive line. The line is shorter, less fortified, and held by exhausted troops with depleted ammunition. At 0830 hours, November 2nd, Rommel sends a situation report to Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. The report is clinical enemy, breakthrough achieved, defensive line withdrawn 5 kilometers, tank strength 102 operational German tanks, 35 operational Italian tanks, fuel remaining sufficient for 150 kilometers movement. Further British attacks expected imminently. Request permission to withdraw to prepared positions at Fuka 60 kilometers west. The response from Berlin arrives at 1347 hours, November 2nd. The message is transmitted directly from Hitler. To Field Marshal Rommel. In the situation in which you find yourself, there can be no other thought but to stand fast, yield not a yard of ground, and throw every gun and every man into the battle. Considerable Air Force reinforcements are being sent to Commander-in-Chief South. The Duce is sending another 3 divisions to Libya. Your enemy, despite his superiority, must also be at the end of his strength. It would not be the first time in history that a strong will has triumphed over the bigger battalions. As to your troops, you can show them no other road than that to victory or death. Adolf Hitler. Rommel reads the message twice. He calls his staff officers to his command vehicle. He reads them Hitler's directive. The room is silent. Major von Mellenthin finally speaks. The directive is impossible to execute. We do not have the fuel to maneuver. We do not have the ammunition to sustain combat. The Air Force reinforcements and Italian divisions will not arrive for weeks. The enemy is not at the end of his strength. We are. Rommel agrees. He orders compliance with Hitler's directive. All units will defend current positions. No further withdrawals authorized without explicit permission from Berlin. Simultaneously, he orders his staff to continue planning the retreat. November 2nd, 1600 hours. British forces attack the new defensive line. The attack lacks the preparation and coordination of earlier assaults. Montgomery is pushing forward with available forces rather than conducting a set-piece offensive. This works to Rommel's advantage. German anti-tank guns positioned in hasty defensive positions destroy 60 British tanks in 4 hours. But the British continue advancing. They have tanks to lose. Rommel does not. By 1900 hours, November 2nd, the defensive line is collapsing in multiple sectors. British armor has penetrated to positions behind the German front line. Italian units are surrendering en masse. The Trieste division surrenders intact, 4,000 men. German units are being bypassed and encircled. Communications are breaking down. Units are out of contact with headquarters. The battle is fragmenting into isolated engagements. At 20:30 hours, Rommel makes his decision. He orders a general withdrawal. All motorized units will retreat west immediately. Infantry units without transport will be evacuated if possible, left behind if necessary. Wounded will be evacuated in available ambulances. Supply dumps will be destroyed if they cannot be evacuated. Rearguards will delay British pursuit. The withdrawal will begin at 2200 hours. The order directly violates Hitler's directive issued 7 hours earlier. Rommel composes a message to Berlin explaining his decision. He does not send it. There is no time for explanations. He will deal with the consequences later if he survives. The withdrawal begins at 2200 hours November 2nd. It is called a fighting retreat. The reality is closer to controlled chaos. Motorized units move west on the single coastal road in massive columns. Trucks, half-tracks, staff cars, ambulances, tanks on transporters, artillery pieces towed by prime movers. Everything that can move flows west. Non-motorized Italian infantry march on foot or surrender. German infantry without transport are loaded onto any vehicle with space. Wounded are piled into trucks. Equipment that cannot be moved is destroyed. Fuel dumps are set ablaze. Ammunition stockpiles are detonated. The British pursue cautiously. Montgomery orders his army to advance but not to overextend. He has won the battle. He does not intend to lose tanks to reckless pursuit. British armor advances to the abandoned German positions, consolidates, then advances again the next morning. This caution saves Rommel's army. November 3rd. Panzer Army Africa withdraws 70 kilometers west to Fuka. British forces are 30 kilometers behind. Rommel establishes a rearguard line with the 21st Panzer Division and elements of the 90th Light Division. The rearguard holds for 6 hours November 3rd, then withdraws after dark. British armor advances to Fuka on November 4th. Rommel is already 60 kilometers farther west at Mersa Matruh. November 4th, a second message arrives from Hitler. This one authorizes withdrawal. The authorization comes 18 hours after Rommel has already begun retreating. The message acknowledges that the situation has become untenable and permits withdrawal to defensible positions. Rommel does not respond. He is managing a retreat, not a correspondence. The pattern repeats for days. Rommel establishes a rearguard position. The rearguard, usually built around whatever panzer unit has fuel, holds for hours or a full day, then withdraws before being outflanked. British forces advance to the abandoned position. Rommel establishes the next rearguard 50 to 80 kilometers farther west. The British reach it the next day. The cycle continues. November 7th. Panzer Armee Africa reaches the Egyptian-Libyan border at Sollum and Halfaya Pass. British forces are 20 kilometers behind. Rommel has 63 operational tanks. Fuel stocks are exhausted. He cannot retreat farther without fuel. He establishes a defensive line and requests emergency fuel deliveries. Berlin promises fuel convoys are en route from Benghazi and Tobruk. November 8th, fuel arrives. Rommel withdraws 80 kilometers west to Tobruk. British forces enter Sollum 6 hours after the last German rearguard departs. The British have advanced 300 kilometers in 6 days but have not encircled or destroyed Rommel's force. November the 9th, the 12th. Rommel withdraws from Tobruk to Benghazi, 400 kilometers west. The withdrawal is no longer a fighting retreat, it is a race. British forces are pursuing but falling behind. Their supply lines stretch back 600 kilometers to Alexandria. Fuel and ammunition must be trucked forward over a single coastal road. The same logistics that crippled Rommel in October now slow Montgomery. November 13th, British forces reach Tobruk. Rommel is 200 kilometers west at Agedapia, the position he held in January 1942 before his spring offensive. He has 41 operational tanks. He has fuel for 100 kilometers. British forces have 600 operational tanks but must pause to resupply before continuing pursuit. November 15th. Montgomery halts the pursuit at Tobruk to consolidate his logistics. He will resume the offensive after supplies have been stockpiled. The operational pause lasts 3 weeks. Rommel uses the pause to continue retreating. On November 20th, Panzer Army Africa reaches El Agheila, 600 kilometers west of El Alamein. The position is defensible. El Agheila sits on a bottleneck between the Mediterranean coast and the salt marshes of the interior. A small force can hold it temporarily. Rommel does not intend to hold it permanently. He continues withdrawing supply dumps and non-essential units farther west to Tripoli. December 12th. Montgomery resumes his offensive. He attacks El Agheila with overwhelming force. Rommel holds the position for 24 hours, then withdraws on December 13th. British forces occupy El Agheila on December 14th. Rommel is already 150 kilometers west, moving toward the defensive line at Buerat. December 26th. Panzer Armee Africa reaches Buerat, 280 kilometers west of El Agheila. Rommel establishes a defensive line and requests permission to continue withdrawing to Tunisia, where German and Italian forces are establishing a new defensive perimeter following the Allied landings in Algeria and Morocco on November 8th. Berlin orders him to hold Buerat. January 15, 1943. Montgomery attacks Buerat with 3 divisions. Rommel holds the line for 36 hours. On January 17th, he withdraws without authorization. Berlin protests. Rommel ignores the protest. His army retreats 400 kilometers west to Tripoli. January 23, 1943. British forces enter Tripoli. Rommel has already withdrawn into Tunisia 200 kilometers farther west. The retreat from El Alamein to Tunisia covers 2,200 kilometers and takes 84 days. Rommel has saved the core of his army 30,000 German troops and sufficient equipment to continue fighting. Italian units have largely been abandoned or surrendered. 35,000 Italians are captured during the retreat, but the German formations remain intact. The mathematics tell the story. At El Alamein, on October 23, 1942, Rommel commanded 53,000 German troops and 489 tanks. On January 23, 1943, arriving in Tunisia, he commands 30,000 German troops and 78 operational tanks. He has lost 43% of his German personnel and 84% of his armor. But he has prevented the complete destruction of Panzer Army Africa. Montgomery has won the battle. Rommel has saved his army. The strategic situation in Tunisia, January 1943, is grim. German and Italian forces hold a perimeter in northern and eastern Tunisia. They are surrounded on 3 sides. American and British forces press. From the west, British 8th Army presses from the east. Supply convoys from Italy are being sunk by Allied aircraft and submarines. Fuel shortages persist. Ammunition shortages persist. The outcome is mathematically inevitable. The Axis forces in North Africa will be destroyed or captured. The question is not whether, but when. Rommel recognizes this. On February 14, 1943, he conducts a limited offensive at Kasserine Pass, attacking inexperienced American units in western Tunisia. The attack succeeds tactically. American forces retreat in disorder, losing 183 tanks and 6,500 men killed, wounded, or captured. But Rommel lacks the fuel and reserves to exploit the breakthrough. He withdraws to his original positions after 8 days. The offensive achieves nothing strategically. It merely delays the inevitable. On March 6, 1943, Rommel launches his final offensive in North Africa, an attack against British positions at Medellin in southeastern Tunisia. The attack is repulsed with heavy losses. Rommel loses 52 tanks. British casualties are minimal. It is Rommel's last battle in Africa. On March 9, 1943, Rommel flies to Germany on medical evacuation. Officially, he is on sick leave for chronic jaundice and exhaustion. Unofficially, he is being removed from a theater that cannot be saved. Hitler awards him the Oak Leaves with Swords and Diamonds to the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military decoration. Rommel requests permission to return to North Africa. Hitler refuses. Command of Axis forces in Tunisia passes to General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim. On May 13, 1943, Axis forces in Tunisia surrender. The final count: 275,000 German and Italian troops captured. Among them are the remnants of Panzer Army Africa, the formations Rommel saved during the retreat from El Alamein. They have fought for 5 months in Tunisia, inflicting casualties, delaying Allied preparations for the invasion of Sicily, but ultimately unable to reverse the strategic situation. The North African campaign is over. The historical assessment of Rommel's retreat from El Alamein divides scholars. Some argue the retreat was a brilliant operational achievement, a masterful fighting withdrawal that saved a German army from encirclement and destruction against overwhelming odds. Others argue the retreat was inevitable, that Rommel had no alternative options, and that any competent commander could have executed the same withdrawal. Both assessments contain truth. The retreat was operationally skillful. Rommel's use of sequential rearguards prevented British forces from encircling his army during the initial withdrawal from El Alamein. His decision to ignore Hitler's directive on November 2 saved Panzer Army Africa from annihilation. Compliance with the order to hold the line would have resulted in the complete destruction of German forces in Egypt. His ability to maintain unit cohesion during an 200-kilometer retreat across hostile desert terrain while under constant air attack and with fuel stocks perpetually inadequate demonstrates exceptional leadership and organizational ability. But the strategic situation rendered the retreat's tactical success meaningless. The Axis forces in Tunisia, reinforced by the troops Rommel saved, were destroyed 5 months later. The troops captured in Tunisia could not be replaced. The equipment lost could not be replaced. Germany's strategic position in the Mediterranean collapsed. The Allied invasion of Sicily proceeded as planned in July 1943. Italy surrendered in September 1943. The Mediterranean became an Allied lake. Every German soldier Rommel saved in North Africa was a soldier unavailable for the defense of France, Italy, or the Eastern Front. The counterfactual question, what if Rommel had been allowed to withdraw from El Alamein before Montgomery attacked, is unanswerable but revealing. If Panzer Army Africa had withdrawn to prepared positions at Mersa Matruh or Sollum in early October 1942, the army would have preserved its tank strength and fuel stocks. British forces would have occupied El Alamein without a battle. Montgomery would have needed to launch his set-piece offensive against a shorter defensive line with intact German forces. The operational outcome would likely have been similar: British superiority in numbers, and supplies would eventually have forced another German withdrawal, but the battle would have occurred on different terrain at different times with different casualties. Hitler's refusal to authorize withdrawal before the battle reflected German strategic thinking. In late 1942, hold every position, trade space for time only when absolutely necessary, prioritize political symbolism over operational flexibility. This thinking crippled German commanders throughout the war. At Stalingrad, simultaneously with El Alamein, the German Sixth Army was encircled because Hitler forbade withdrawal from the city. At Stalingrad 91, Hattus's German troops surrendered in February 1943. At El Alamein, 30,000 German troops were saved by Rommel's unauthorized withdrawal and fought for 5 more months in Tunisia before surrendering. The mathematics are unforgiving. Rommel's retreat saved 30,000 men who were captured 5 months later. The strategic outcome was unchanged, but those 5 months mattered to the men who lived them. The broader question, whether Rommel was a great commander or merely a competent general operating in favorable circumstances, remains debated. His early successes in North Africa, February-June 1941, demonstrated tactical brilliance and operational audacity. His ability to achieve surprise, exploit enemy weaknesses, and sustain offensive operations with minimal logistical support was exceptional. His understanding of mobile warfare in desert terrain was superior to British commanders' understanding until Montgomery's appointment. But Rommel's strategic judgment was flawed. His advances in 1941 and 1942 repeatedly outran his supply lines. His offensives succeeded tactically but failed strategically because he could not sustain them. His failure to capture Tobruk in 1941 prolonged the siege for 8 months and tied down German units needed elsewhere. His decision to advance to El Alamein in summer 1942, despite fuel shortages, placed Panzer Army Africa in an untenable position from which only retreat was possible. A more cautious commander would have consolidated positions at more defensible lines farther west, but a more cautious commander would not have achieved Rommel's tactical successes. The Desert Fox mythology. Rommel as the honorable warrior, the apolitical soldier, the brilliant tactician respected by his enemies, was constructed by British propaganda during the war and embraced by German post-war accounts. The mythology served British purposes. If Rommel was a genius, then British victories over him were more impressive. The mythology served German purposes. If Rommel was honorable and apolitical, then the Wehrmacht's reputation could be partially rehabilitated in the post-war era. The reality was more complex. Rommel was a competent and occasionally brilliant tactical commander. He was also a committed Nazi who accepted rapid promotion and honors from Hitler, who implemented brutal policies against civilian populations in occupied territories, and whose military operations served a regime conducting industrial genocide. His tactical skills do not erase these facts. His disobedience of Hitler's orders at El Alamein, the decision that saved his army, was not moral courage but military pragmatism. On October 14, 1944, Rommel received visitors at his home in Herrlingen, Germany. Two generals arrived in a staff car. They informed Rommel that his name had appeared in documents related to the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt against Hitler. He was implicated in the conspiracy. He was given a choice-face trial for treason resulting in execution and reprisals against his family, or commit suicide resulting in a state funeral and protection for his family. Rommel chose suicide. He took a cyanide capsule. He died at 13:10 hours. The official announcement stated he died of wounds sustained when his staff car was strafed by Allied aircraft in July 1944. Whether Rommel was actively involved in the July 20th plot remains unclear. Some conspirators claimed he supported the assassination. Others claimed he refused to participate. The evidence is contradictory. What is clear is that by October 1944, Rommel had concluded that Germany was losing the war and that Hitler's leadership was disastrous. This conclusion came 2 years after El Alamein, 2 years after the mathematics became unforgiving. At 240 hours on October 23, 1942, Rommel stood beside his staff car watching the British barrage. He knew the mathematics. He knew Panzer Army Africa was outnumbered, 2-to-1 in troops, outgunned, 2-to-1 in artillery, overwhelmed, 2-to-1 in tanks, and outmatched 4-to-1 in aircraft. He knew fuel stocks were critical and supply lines were failing. He knew the defensive line would not hold. He knew the war in North Africa was lost. He also knew that 53,000 German soldiers and 51,000 Italian soldiers depended on his decisions. When the line collapsed, he made the decision that saved as many as could be saved. The decision violated orders. The decision invited court-martial. The decision was correct. The retreat from El Alamein was not a strategic victory. It was a tactical necessity executed with professional competence. Rommel saved his army from annihilation in November 1942 so that it could be captured in May 1943. The strategic outcome was unchanged. The men who survived those 5 months might have disagreed about whether those months mattered. The mathematics are unforgiving. The moral accounting is more complex.